July 1st, 1976. Klingenberg, Bavaria. This photo was taken just a few hours before she died. You can barely see me. I am in the back row. Behind Father Alt, I am holding a rosary in both hands. My eyes look nervous. They should. I had no idea what I was about to witness. That is Anneliese Michel in the middle. Her eyes are closed. Her skin looks pale. Her lips are cracked. There are dark marks on her wrists. The church said she did it to herself. They were wrong. I was 23, a theology student from Mainz. The church sent me to assist with a rare case of possession. I thought I would pray, hold candles, help the priests. I was not prepared to watch a girl starve to death while speaking in Latin the first time I met her. She said my name before I introduced myself. She whispered it in a low voice. She said, "Marcus, that is my name." I had never met her before. I had not even told the family I was coming. She was strapped to the bed with cloth strips. Her eyes were open but distant. There was a faint smell in the room, like incense mixed with something rotten. Her mother sat in the corner, crying softly into a handkerchief. The priest stood above her, reading from the old Latin text. That was the first day, but her story began much earlier. She was born in a village called Lebelfing, Lower Bavaria, a quiet town. Her father Joseph worked in a lumber mill. Her mother Anna led Bible study for children. They were strict but kind, a Catholic family. Church every Sunday. No drinking, no television, just work, prayer, and structure. Anneliese was the oldest of 4 sisters. She was quiet, polite, and helpful. She took piano lessons twice a week. She prayed before meals. She helped her sisters with homework. No one expected what would happen to her at 16. Everything changed. She began experiencing something like sleep paralysis. She described a heavy weight pressing on her chest at night. She said she could not breathe. She said she saw a black figure with no mouth standing above her bed. One night, she screamed so loud that the neighbors heard her through the wall. Her mother found her under the bed, shaking. Her nightgown was soaked with sweat. Her hands were bleeding. She had bitten through her lip. The doctors said it was epilepsy. They prescribed medication. The symptoms faded. For a while, she returned to school. She smiled again, but it did not last. A year later, the voices started. She told her mother she could smell something burning in her room, like sulfur and feces. No one else could smell it. She said the voices told her she was cursed. They called her worthless. They said she would burn. She started hitting herself. In her sleep, she tore the crucifix from her wall. She stopped going to school. She refused to eat meat. She stared at the floor for hours without blinking one day. She told her parents she had seen the face of the Virgin Mary, but her expression was not joyful. She looked afraid. The family turned to the church. Father Renz came first, then Father Alt, then me. When I arrived in early 1975, she could barely stand on her own. Her arms were covered in small bruises. Her fingers were swollen. Her ankles bent inward when she walked. She weighed less than 90 pounds. She would scream at the sight of a crucifix. She said it burned her. I did not believe in possession. I thought it was mental illness, maybe schizophrenia, maybe trauma. But she spoke words no one had taught her. She quoted scripture in Latin. She named people she had never met. She knew personal things about the priests. She called one of them by his old childhood nickname. When asked how she knew, she just smiled. The church finally approved the rite, a full exorcism. This was rare, very rare. The bishop signed the papers after months of review. The first session was held in her bedroom. The door was locked, curtains drawn, a bowl of holy water placed near her head. She thrashed the moment the priest entered. She barked like a dog. She spat on the floor and cursed. Her voice dropped lower than I thought possible. I recorded it on a small cassette tape. When I played it back later, I heard something else, another voice, not hers, not human. Father Alt turned off the tape halfway. Through he said we were not ready for what lived inside her. Each session grew more violent. She would scream until blood came from her mouth. She chewed the edge of the mattress. She called herself nothing. She said she was a vessel. She said there were others inside her. She named them. One called itself Cain. Another said it was Nero. A third voice said it had lived in Judas. Sometimes she would go quiet for hours. She would lay still, pale eyes wide open. She would stare at the ceiling and speak to someone no one could see then. Suddenly, she would shriek and twist her body like something was pulling her limbs from inside. We tied her wrists with soft cloth. Still, she found ways to scratch the walls with her fingernails. She once bit through her own skin. Her parents begged the priests to stop, but Anneliese would not let them. She said she had to finish. She said souls were watching. She said her pain was not hers anymore. I believed her, because no human being would choose to suffer like that. No one would choose to starve slowly, just to prove something to a God who never answered. But she did, and she never stopped praying, even through cracked lips and torn throat. She whispered the Lord's Prayer with every breath she had left. That was only the beginning. The day after that session, the crucifix in her room fell. It did not slip. It did not slide. It lifted. I saw it move before it dropped to the floor. It landed at my feet. The base was bent like it had been twisted. I picked it up and held it for the rest of the day. The smell in the room was stronger now, rotten, like burned hair and spoiled meat. We opened the windows, but it stayed. That morning, Anneliese did not speak. She stared at the ceiling. Her lips moved without sound. Her mother brought her water. She refused it. She had not eaten in days. The priest asked her a question. She turned to him slowly. Her mouth opened. But the voice that answered was not her own. It was deep and dry. It answered in Latin she had never studied. Latin, that voice was the first of many. There were 5 in total. Each one sounded different. Each one had its own words, its own moments. One spoke only in the dark. One screamed during the prayers. One answered questions that no one had asked. They did not speak over each other. They waited. They took turns, like they were watching. One of them said its name was Judas. The priest asked, "What is your punishment?" The voice laughed. It said, "There is no punishment. There is only a throne." We recorded that voice. Later, the church destroyed the tape, but I remember it. Anneliese had stopped calling for help. She had stopped begging. She just stared, sometimes at the ceiling, sometimes at us. Once she looked directly at me and said, "They are watching you now." She smiled. It was not her smile. It stretched too far. It was too still. I could not move for several seconds. We began the rites more often, twice a week. Each one lasted over 4 hours. She would scream for 3 of them. Her body was breaking. Her skin turned pale. Her ribs pressed through. Her lips were bleeding. Her feet were curled inwards like a child. She spoke in other languages. Not just Latin, Old German, Hebrew, Aramaic. None of us knew where she learned it. We showed her a Bible. She screamed. We played a recording of the Lord's Prayer. She vomited into her hands. I saw her bite through her tongue. She did not flinch. I began keeping notes in a separate notebook. Not for faith. For proof, I recorded dates, quotes, movements. I made diagrams of the room. I wrote the words she spoke in her sleep. I showed them to no one. One night, she looked at the notebook and said, "They do not like that." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Writing gives them form." Then she whispered a name. I do not write that name anymore. That night, I burned 6 pages. Father Renz asked me why. I told him they were smudged. He did not ask again. The family was falling apart. The sisters were sent to live with an aunt. The father sat in the kitchen for hours without speaking. The mother slept on the floor beside her daughter, praying every hour. The priests were tired. Their hands shook when they poured holy water. Their voices cracked during the prayers. But we continued because Anneliese never asked us to stop. She said this was her duty. She said she was carrying something that did not belong to her. She said she had been chosen to show what people had forgotten, that evil exists, that suffering is not always meaningless. She said, "I am doing this for them." I asked, "For who?" She said, "For the ones who think nothing is watching." That sentence kept me awake for nights. One day, during a session, she looked up and spoke in perfect Latin. She recited the names of dozens of saints. Then she started naming the damned, people we had never told her about, names from the war, from history, from our own lives. She said my grandfather's name. I had never spoken it to anyone there. She said, "He still prays, but no one listens." I fell to my knees. After that session, I stayed outside. It was raining. I did not notice. I stood under a tree until the sky turned orange. When I walked back into the house, she was waiting in the hallway. She was barefoot. Her hands were folded. She looked at me and said, "If you leave, they will find someone else." Then she walked back to her room. That night, I did not sleep. I prayed for the first time in weeks. I did not pray for her. I prayed for myself, and still, the next morning, she was alive. The final week began with silence. No screaming, no scratching, no voices. She just stared at the ceiling. Something about it felt worse than all the noise before. Before, there was a fight. Now, there was only waiting. She had stopped responding to her name. She blinked very little. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The room had changed too. The air felt lighter, but it did not feel peaceful. It felt empty. It felt like something had already taken her and was just waiting for her body to give up. Father Alt said the silence was a good sign. He thought the spirits were retreating. He said the prayers were working. I was not sure. She began looking at places where no one was standing. Her eyes would follow things slowly. Her fingers would trace something invisible in the air. Sometimes she smiled at the corner of the room. The smile was soft. It looked like relief. I asked her what she saw. She said, "They are not angry anymore." She said it like she was talking about old friends. The next morning, I found her sitting up in bed. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was moving. She was singing. The melody was slow, sad. It sounded like a lullaby. I stepped closer. She was singing the same song her mother used to sing to her as a child. The words were soft, but there was something under them. A second voice, very faint, humming beneath her own. It sounded broken, like breath struggling to become sound. There was no one else in the room. That was the first time. I ran. I left the house without my coat. I stood in the gravel driveway for nearly an hour. It was cold. The sky was grey. I could feel something behind the windows watching me. When I came back inside, no one mentioned I had left. Her mother was sitting quietly with a rosary. The priest was writing in a small book. No one looked at me. I went upstairs and found Anneliese asleep. She was pale still. Her body looked thinner than before. Her wrists were bruised. Her knees were scraped from crawling. There was dirt under her fingernails. That night, I could not bring myself to eat. I tried to read the Gospel of Mark, but the words felt hollow, like the page itself wanted to stay blank the next morning. The bishop sent a letter. He had approved one final session. The date was set, July 1st. At sunset, that gave us 3 days. We did not tell Anneliese right away, but she already knew. She said, "I dreamed of it." She said, "That will be the last night," she said. "I am almost finished." Then she asked for water. It was the first time in days she had asked for anything her mother brought. A glass. She drank it slowly. She smiled and said, "Thank you." Her voice was soft again. It sounded like her. I almost cried. That night, she asked to go outside. We helped her to the garden. She walked barefoot across. The grass dot the wind was cold. She looked up at the sky. The clouds moved fast. The moon was full. She knelt down and whispered something we could not hear. Then she said a name. I cannot write that name. I will never say it again. When we brought her back inside, she slept through the night. No screaming, no shaking, only breathing, soft, slow, peaceful. Father Renz told me she had been redeemed. I wanted to believe that, but I could not forget what I had seen. The way her body moved like it was being pulled. The way she stared through people, not at them. The way she said names no one should know, and I could not forget the second voice during the lullaby. The final day arrived with a quiet that felt unnatural. The house was clean. The room was lit with candles. The cross was back on the wall. We dressed in clean shirts. The priest wore the white vestment. Anneliese lay in bed with a blanket pulled to her chin. She looked very small. Her eyes were closed when we began. She opened them and looked at me. She did not look afraid. She looked tired, but calm. I held her hand. It was cold. The ritual lasted 2 hours. Father Alt read from the text. Father Renz held the book. I stood beside the bed. She whispered a few words during the prayer. One of them was forgiveness. She said, "I am ready." Then she closed her eyes again. A few moments later, her body tensed, her back arched, her mouth opened. A sound came out. It was not a scream. It was more like a breath, being pulled away by something invisible. Then she went still. Her chest did not rise. Her lips stopped moving. The priest finished the prayer. We waited. After 1 minute, her chest moved again. She was breathing. Very slowly. She did not speak again. We stayed with her through the night. By morning, she was gone. Her mother found her with her hands folded across her stomach. The room smelled like ash, but nothing had burned. The police were called. An investigation began. The church went silent, but I knew what I had seen. The police came before sunrise. I was still sitting in the hallway. Anneliese's mother was in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. Her face was blank. Her father did not speak. When the officers walked into the bedroom, they paused. They asked who had declared the death. No one had. We just knew. The room felt cold. The candles were burned down to wax. She lay with her hands folded. Her mouth was slightly open. Her lips were torn. Her feet were covered in dried blood. The paramedics refused to move her until they had permission from higher authorities. The police took photos. They asked questions. One of them pointed to the marks on her arms, another lifted the crucifix and stared at it for several seconds. They asked for the recordings. Father Renz said no. They asked again. He still said no. The next day, the church sent a representative. He wore a black coat. He did not sit down. He asked for the tapes and the journals. They were given to him, but I kept one tape. The first one I ever made. The one with her voice, and the other voice under it. I never played it again after the day of the funeral. Anneliese was buried in the town cemetery. Her coffin was small. Her body weighed less than 70 pounds. The villagers whispered. Some said we were killers. Others said we had saved her soul. The priests were quiet. No one from the diocese came to the funeral. No reporters. No church officials. Only her family. The priests and me. I watched her mother collapse when they lowered the casket. She screamed her daughter's name, like it would bring her back. I looked away. 1 week later, the investigation became public. The doctors had performed an autopsy. Said her cause of death was simple. Starvation. They said she had gone without food for over 30 days. Her body was too weak to carry on. The prosecutor blamed the church. He said the priests had denied her care. He said the parents were too deep in their beliefs. They called it homicide through neglect. Father Alt and Father Renz were charged. So were her parents. The trial began in early spring the next year. I was called to testify. I sat in a small wooden box in the courtroom. The judge asked me what I had seen. I told him the truth. I said she had voices that were not her own. I said she spoke languages she had never studied. I said she knew things she could not have known. They laughed. One of the lawyers asked if I had ever read psychology books. He said I was young. He said I had been influenced by the priests. He said what I saw was nothing more than illness. I asked him if illness could predict the date of death. He said I was emotional. The courtroom was full of strangers. None of them had been there. None of them had heard her scream at night. None of them had seen her hands bent backward until the bones cracked. They played one tape, the cleanest one, the one where she recited the Lord's Prayer while growling. People shifted in their seats. One woman left the room. The judge did not react. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was read. Guilty, but the punishment was soft. 6 months of probation. A fine. No. Jail. No one was satisfied. Some said the priests should be locked away. Others said they had done their Duty, no one mentioned her name again in public. Church distanced itself. They said this was an isolated case. They said it was handled by local clergy. They said no further comment. But the village remembered. People walked past her grave in silence. Children crossed the street rather than walk by the Michel house. Her sisters grew quiet. They changed. Schools, the family kept the curtains drawn at all times. House stayed dark. I visited the cemetery once. More, it was raining. Her headstone was clean. Someone had placed white flowers there. I stood for a long time. I thought I heard a voice behind me. When I turned, no one was there. I went back to my small apartment. I listened to the last tape one more time. It played clearly. Her voice was soft, calm. She said, "I am free." Then came a second voice. Not loud, but close. It said, "So are we." I turned it off. I never played it again. I never returned to Klingenberg. Years passed before I could speak of it again. The church never contacted me. The priests were reassigned. The Michel family moved away. The house stayed empty for a long time. The neighbors said they could still hear sounds at night, prayers, cries, sometimes a woman's voice whispering. Softly, I told myself it was just the wind. But I knew that voice. It was hers. I left theology. I never became a priest. I tried to live a normal life. I found work at a small library. I never spoke about the case. Not once. But silence does not make things disappear. 10 years later, they opened her grave. The family had requested an exhumation. They wanted to see her again. They wanted to believe her body was still whole. The church said no. The court said yes. When they lifted the coffin, the smell spread across the cemetery. The workers stepped back. The box was damp. The wood soft. They opened it slowly. People said her body had not decayed. They said her face looked peaceful. They said it was a miracle. The officials said the coffin had been sealed tightly. The soil was cold. The conditions had preserved her body. Everyone chose what they wanted to believe. I stayed home that day, but I saw the photos later. I could not sleep for weeks. In one of them, her eyes were half open. It looked like she was still watching. The bishop sent new letters to the priests. He said no more rites of this kind would be allowed. He said this tragedy must never repeat. But in secret, others continued. They said there were still cases like hers. Quiet ones. Hidden in small towns. Done behind closed doors. I burned every note I had kept from that time. Every page. Every drawing. Except one tape. The same one I hid years before. I kept it locked away. But sometimes, when the nights were too still, I would dream of that sound again. The low breath that was not hers. In my dream, I am back in that room. The candlelight flickers. Her eyes open. She looks at me and says the same words. "You were not supposed to see this." Then I wake up, and I can still smell the incense. I have wondered for years if we saved her soul or lost our own. I have read the reports. I know what science says. I know the medical explanations, but none of them change what I saw. There are still nights when I hear a faint voice behind me. Not loud, not clear, just a whisper close to my ear. Marcus, that is my name. I turn. Nothing is there. The air feels colder. The shadows move differently. And somewhere, far away, a church bell rings. Maybe it is only memory. Maybe it is guilt. Or maybe it never left.